schedule. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Michelle Villagran. I'm an assistant professor at San Jose State University with the iSchool. And today I'm going to share and speak with you a little bit about this idea I've had percolating, and actually with some work I've done with Dr. Hoffman and Dr. Ghosh around specifically my area around cultural competence. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about what I'm going to propose today. We have the recording in progress. And thank you to San Jose State University School of Information, founding partner for the Library 2.0. So thank you. And also I want to say just thank you to Dr. Hoffman for inviting me to participate in this particular Library 2.0. So the topic today, tensions in digital privacy, cultural competence as a catalyst for change. I titled it at the end. It's always the hardest thing to do. And I was really thinking about, is this a solution? Is this an opportunity? Where does, whether it's cultural competence, which I'll talk about briefly in a minute, cultural humility, cultural intelligence, where does this fit in when we're thinking about digital privacy? And as we know, there's a lot of legal and ethical concerns when it comes to information and communications technology. It seems like every time there's a new form of technology out there, some new form of communication, whether it's a new type of data aggregation or data analysis, there's more privacy concerns and possible problems. So with this, I'm thinking about how can we address privacy problems requiring, really incorporating, I should say, not requiring, but incorporating, thinking about the legal, thinking about political, social, technical, as well as cultural dilemmas to really create a system in which we're thinking about how these concepts can then operate in a way where we recognize privilege. We think about how we mediate relationships and even sources of identity. So I'm going to start with AI. Many of you are probably familiar with artificial intelligence. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with AI, but just to kind of frame this and set it up. The term artificial intelligence is really this umbrella term used to describe a range of activities that occur that a machine performs. It could be machine learning, it could be machine reasoning. And as we've seen over the past several, actually the past decade, how AI is increasing, it's exploding, particularly when it comes to decision making. If we think about even social media and smart devices, I just got yesterday, what is this? A Google, I don't even know what it's called. One of those screens, it's like a Google Node, similar to my Alexa. But if we think about how the concern that when we have these deep learning algorithms, which have become ubiquitous really in the privacy spaces. Healthcare, I think with the pandemic really exacerbated, particularly for underserved, even underrepresented populations, but also in finance, banking, education, law enforcement, the list goes on, even in marketing. Because of this, there have been a lot of concerns even raised around accountability. And this is one graphic I pulled out because I want us to think about the impact of artificial intelligence. And is it high risk or low risk when it comes to your own personal data? And so this is a nice matrix to just keep in mind when you're thinking about that. And the challenges to artificial intelligence accountability that exists at I would say every aspect, every stage within the life cycle, from when data is collected all the way to when it's delivered, and even beyond then. And human decision making, right? There's bias. We're all biased. We all have biases built in, particularly implicit. We have explicit too, but these unconscious biases, and therefore decisions could be arbitrary or even have a lack of, say, set of rules. But humans, we can be held accountable. We can work on that. But can systems? So as we think about how, I would say AI has really raised the stakes here when we're thinking about our own privacy and even the privacy of the systems that your patrons use. The role of algorithmic decision making really runs the gamut. Questions of, who's going to get a mortgage, who's going to get hired, who gets released from jail. We heard about that earlier in the keynote. Who might be suspected of a crime. And therefore, I have to think about, well, how can we create a system that is culturally competent? Is that possible? And AI bias, this occurs because human beings, choose the data the algorithms use, um, and also decide how the results of those algorithms will be applied. So without extensive testing, without diverse teams, without extensive cultural competence training, I would even say cultural humility added onto that, it's easy for unconscious biases to creep in and enter these models. And then these AI systems, these models that human beings have created, then, right, it's automated. They are then perpetuated and based on those prior models. And there's I read recently two statistics that I'll share. The US Department of Commerce, there was a study that came out, and I think many of us are aware of this, that they found that facial recognition AI often misidentifies people of color. And we've seen with law enforcement utilizing facial recognition tools. There was an interesting report that came out from Data Robot. They did a state of AI bias report. 81% of businesses, and these are leaders in corporate, specifically I think it was corporate America, 81%, they want government regulation to define and prevent AI bias. So they're putting it on the government to figure this out and to regulate. Now, we do need regulations and laws, but also programmers, researchers, data scientists. We have biases, and if we're going to be working with these systems and developing them, even from product development perspective, we have to take into consideration our own biases. So this was just this morning. I was looking at the news. I just did a Google search, and I wanted to see what articles were out there, some news and non-scholarly literature, just to see what the headlines were. I always like to look at what the headlines are. And these are probably in the last, I think, 2 weeks or 3 weeks total. But you see everything from the problem with biased AIs and how to make AI better. We're all looking for what's the solution? How can we make AI better? 5 things your AI ML training data is lacking. What are those 5? I thought this was a positive one I saw. AI as a powerful CX tool for empathy, which empathy then ties into emotional intelligence and is a whole other level of concern, I would say, in systems. And can you actually apply and measure emotions within systems? Managing the risk of inevitably biased visual artificial intelligence systems. And then healthcare, there were actually many articles around the healthcare concerns and how data being created is leading to unequal care. AI isn't ready to make unsupervised decisions, as well as job recruitment. There's a lot around, one article around, edging out older applicants. So systems being programmed, and then, therefore, because you're of older age, you won't be qualified or even be recognized possibly for that job to get an interview. But using AI, does it solve human error in data-driven analytics? And then the last one's about hiring for diversity. So there's a big concern here when we're connecting, if we're thinking about diversity and even a broader concept of making our profession more diverse, think about those systems, and it's like we're just perpetuating the whole thing even within our systems, so that our systems are not culturally competent, I would say. So first recommendation is to educate, which we do through getting your MLIS or trainings or webinars like this, but educating beyond library and information science, library information studies, archivists, beyond our world. So educating those data scientists, those experts that are responsible for AI and what AI looks like, and also how even your organization values should be embedded into these models themselves. And their guardrails, are there policies that can be put into place beyond, we'll say, the regulatory or even the legal side. Another concern, I would say, or another element is around transparency. Transparency to help people understand how algorithms create predictions and make these decisions. One of the ongoing challenges around AI, for example, has been the seen as the black box, we'll say. So there's input and output, but no knowledge of the internal workings. Unless you're that data scientist that's actually programming it, do you even know what those internal workings are? Possibly, and your biases may then be built into it. So let's move to where I want to go and really thinking about cultural competence, cultural awareness, cultural intelligence, cultural humility. Integrating some of these elements, which have been largely neglected. Actually, at the end, I have references. So, like Hunt and McLevy in 2019, Lugren in 2018, they have confirmed this has been neglected in this space specifically when it comes to thinking about AI. And cultural competence, and even cultural intelligence, there are a lot of tools and assessments out there. I'm sure many of you have taken the implicit association test through Harvard. Uh, will these help software developers? Will they help them to understand and even self-assess their biases for, we'll say, fair, accountable, transparent, and ethical AI? Cultural identity, as we know, has significant impact on learning because culture affects cognitive processes, perceptions, our interactions with the environment. So, addressing cultural challenges and concerns, including those of inclusion and also representation, will help minimize challenges in the development of AI. But the question is how to do that. So, here's where I think is a possibility. Maybe not the solution, but I feel like this could be a pivotal piece if we can get everyone on board to participate and do so. So making systems more culturally aware or more culturally intelligent. It's become a concern actually of scholars as these technologies have advanced over the years. And actually, it's become of great deal of importance in understanding culture to understanding individuals' behaviors within systems. So I'm speaking about the programmers, the data scientists, those that are developing the algorithms, not necessarily your end user that might come in to use the system. But both of these could necessitate and possibly help with poor quality concerning system interactions and that final outcome. Hopefully, it could also help with good decisions in developing and utilizing these systems. So the concept I would say around accountability systems, we'll say organizational practice of cultural competency is not new. We know overall's work in library and information studies, but in the public sector, it's not new either. Public sector organizations have a responsibility in promoting cultural competence and incorporating practices that serve diverse communities. And there's this model by Romzek and Dubnick from actually the 80s, I think it was 87. It's a framework where they propose these 4 systems of accountability. We have the bureaucratic, we have the legal, the professional, and the political. Now, Carzales in 2019, so just a few years ago, actually applied this through the lens of cultural competence and expanded it in a way that now we can look beyond. It's still this 4 framework model, but thinking about it in a way and in areas in which now expands beyond and thinking about power dynamics, potential conflicts that might come into play in systems. For example, ethics and values, and ethics is a huge concept in itself. But even thinking about the terms that are used, the statements, the policies around this. So I'm going to spend, this is probably the slide I'll spend the most time on because there's 2 components here, and actually it builds onto the cultural humility piece as well. So capturing data context is, I would say, is only one part of the challenge. Since to correctly capture and contextualize information, we as researchers, if you're a developer, we do have to possess some sense of cultural competence to build, we'll say, appropriately responsive solutions so that we can then counteract, the problems we're discussing, say with AI, for example. It's loosely defined, so we'll just say cultural competence. I'll give you 2 definitions. Loosely defined as the ability to engage knowledgeably with people across cultures. Came out in the 60s and 70s, really around the civil rights movement. Cross's work in 89 was really around the kind of social work movement. And the term hence became really tied to healthcare. That's where I think the majority of the literature on cultural competence is, with the assumption that the more knowledge we have about another culture, the greater the competence in practice. And so Cross actually defined it as, and his collaborators defined it as a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together in a system, agency, or among professionals and enable the system, the agency, or professionals to work effectively in cross-cultural situations. And you'll see on the screen, there are these 5, I guess, summarized, we'll say, applications, which tell, like, in practice, what does this mean? And this is thinking about, humans in practice, so valuing diversity, conducting self-assessment, managing dynamics of difference, acquiring and institutionalizing cultural knowledge, and adapting to diversity and the cultural context that we serve. So this is all fabulous. It's great. And yes, and we want culturally competent LIS professionals. However, cultural competence alone, there's, I think, 2 main problems. One, it suggests that there is a categorical knowledge a person could attain about a group of people, and that could then lead to bias and stereotyping. And then secondly, there is an endpoint, right? If we look at on the right, there's this endpoint to becoming culturally competent, which I don't agree with. And if you look at newer models, you'll see that it's not an endpoint. This is ongoing. So there's now a shift in frameworks to where cultural humility, cultural sensitivity has been incorporated. And cultural humility was introduced, I believe it was in 98. It was in the late 90s, around focusing on self-reflection, personal critique, acknowledging your own biases. And there's this shift, I would say, because now it's focusing on, or recognizing, I would say, that shift of intersecting identities and encouraging that curiosity. So it's almost a step before you even get to cultural competence. So, and if I can ask everyone to mute, I hear background noise, please. So while cultural competence is traditionally something intended for human interaction, as AI continues to advance, it's imperative we think about our systems and how can they become culturally competent? Can they? So I would say becoming culturally competent, it's a developmental process. It's going to go, programmers, data scientists, those working with these systems need to almost become experts when it comes to cultural competence, have also cultural humility as a component. And therefore, learning cultural competence is going to take a lot of time and effort. This isn't a one-stop, you take a training and you're done. This is lifelong, ongoing. And so technology developers, again, data scientists, for example, must bring that inclusiveness to platforms. If we don't, we're going to continue to perpetuate what's going on right now and what we're experiencing with bias. And I would say there's a direct correlation with a lack of cultural competence, even a lack of cultural humility. There's a direct correlation to inherent bias within technology's development. So I wanted to throw this image in. I love it. It's from the University of Oregon. Actually, the original image is from the Project Ready. And for those that aren't as familiar with cultural humility, this is a great graphic to kind of show you both sides. So what does it mean, cultural competence? What does it mean for cultural humility? So a culturally competent data scientist or a culturally competent technologist or programmer needs to have knowledge and awareness of beliefs, practices, cultural values, and even the prevalence among specific populations. So where is this system? Is it going to be rolled out worldwide? It's going to be in every single home in the world. Okay, then you must know and learn about differences of all these diverse populations. And so this is going to take a lot of work. It's not, again, going to happen overnight. But one operating with cultural humility must listen. So I used to work a while ago, I worked for a legal vendor, and I learned about the product development side. I would hear from customers on my end working with librarians, but I also would see what it was like on the programming side and developing our systems. And I always wondered and asked, and this is long before I did cultural competence work, but I always asked, well, do you ask your communities? Do you know what they want? Are you listening? Even if you like a survey, beyond a survey and going out and doing focus groups and whatnot, but are you paying attention? Are you listening to reading the literature? Are you watching? Are you observing? And have curiosity to then take that information in, have your own awareness of your own biases, and attempt to be non-judgmental then when you are creating this product, this system. And recognizing the privilege that you have, your inherent status of privilege as that researcher or that designer or that programmer or that product developer. So I would always get, oh yeah, I listen. And this is, over 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I don't know. Yeah, about 20 years ago. And I started to realize there was a trend. I was hearing from clients and librarians that they weren't listening. They were listening to, we need this feature change, or it's about usability, but not realizing that there are biases built in. So that's where the cultural humility needs to come in. It has to be a component of listening, being interested, being curious, and then actually applying that in your work. Now, I thought this was really on point. I just came across it. It was published this year, 2022. There's an article in the International Journal of, I think it's Societal Robotics. I might have that wrong, but it just was released this year. And within this article, the authors really, they tried to make a robot culturally competent. And so it involved, and this is just a snapshot of just the one piece in their experiment. So they had a robot that was made aware of particular participants' backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. They preloaded and employed this cultural knowledge base during testing. And then they had differing languages, right? Databases developed in 3 different cultures. And then they tailored the interactions to a culture-specific level. And then in their second half of testing, shifted towards a more personalized interaction. And then finally, propagating its learning of the participants in just one particular area, they saw that there were some improved predictions about the values and preferences of participants. Now, I'm not saying we need to get to the level of having robots culturally competent, but that ties to AI. These are machines, machine learning. So if it's already being tested and worked on, and I actually need to dive further into this article to see what were the final outcomes or the recommendations, but it's certainly a possibility. And I too, in this research, I don't know if was there any ongoing cultural humility, cultural competence training? Were there reflections? Were there dialogues? Were there other things they had involved here for those that were preloading and say programming the robot? Because that'll be another interesting element to add. But lastly, because I know we're getting close to time, I want to just also mention cultural intelligence. I've mentioned it several times, and it's really the heart of where my work is. So stemming from cultural competence is cultural intelligence around a person's capability to function effectively in an, say, unfamiliar environment. And CQ here, cultural intelligence, is an excellent tool. I think it's really an opportunity. It's a framework that can then be even added on to the prior framework we saw earlier as a tool for AI development, since as Griffer and Perlis said in 2007, the development of cultural intelligence begins with a study of self and awareness that everyone has a multi-perspective identity. And so I just have a few final remarks here, and then I want to look at the chat and see what you all think. Current software development does suffer from this situation. We've seen it We've seen it probably with our own eyes. We've read about it. We probably know friends, have heard stories, everything from in academia to law enforcement to healthcare. And so this limited lens where we're at right now, when we uh, think of AI, and we think of the impacts with our own privacy and digital privacy, what are the potentials with artificial intelligence? This limited lens where we're at now really diminishes the potential, I think. So I want to ask, what do you think? Do you think cultural competence, cultural humility, adding in is a viable, I won't say solution, but maybe opportunity to help evade these poor quality concerns we have with system interaction and good decision making? And even more so when we consider privacy concerns. Can cultural competence assist in building appropriately responsive systems and solutions that can then counteract those embedded norms? And while you're thinking about that very big question we're not going to solve in the next 3 minutes, I want to just show you my references and do a quick, just quick wrap up. That the application when we think of cultural competence and cultural intelligence, cultural humility to technologies will not only deepen technological intelligence, but ensure that inclusive, or I should say inclusion actually, and representation. And it's even critical beyond the privacy space. This is a much broader, but I want to apply this and see, thinking about systems, can it be done? What would it look like? And so the critical task for all of you is to email me, contact me with your thoughts. How can we increase the cultural competence of not just people, but embed it into systems to engage with these algorithmic tasks? And I say, especially, but not limited to those developers and those other experts that are creating these systems. And here's the, oops, remaining references and then my contact info. So I'm going to leave you with that, and let me just pop to the chat because I think there's like 2 minutes left to see if there was any burning questions, and if I don't get to them, I will email you. I see one. Would you address cultural aspect that with respect to ethnicity and that of tech culture, Western thinking versus non-Western thinking, gender biased thinking, for example, with respect to regional perspectives? Any thoughts on AI's ability to leverage playing field for rural communities? Uh, I think we have work to do. So, with respect to, especially with Western Anglo thinking, we need to really get rid of that. We need to actually be on the same page when thinking about, we should look at the broader picture, the broader concern that it's digital privacy across the board. Um, we know that there's gender bias thinking. We know there's other biases, a lot of unconscious biases. So if we can get beyond the cultural aspects, which again is another hard part, but maybe if there's ongoing cultural dialogue, ongoing cultural trainings, ongoing understanding of those populations with which this system is going to be disseminated to, there might be an opportunity. But I think we have a lot of work to do in that space. And there's probably some literature on that too. So I'd be happy to follow up for a more in-depth response for you. If you can email me, that would be great. And I see there's a few more, but I know I have like 30 seconds. So thank you all. Please email me if you have any thoughts about this and how we could curtail, like I would say, the whole issue around making systems smarter, but in a way that we are not hurting one another, and really ensuring that they are culturally smart and culturally responsive to meet our needs and those of the communities of which are going to be utilizing them. So thank you.